Millionaire saves drowning woman, not knowing she's his business rival's daughter. Welcome to a story so brimming with tension and surprises that you'll find it nearly impossible to look away. In this harrowing tale, we delve into the life of Nicholas Harrington, a self-made millionaire whose carefully orchestrated world shatters the moment he leaps into the waters of Lake Como to rescue a drowning stranger. Little does he know that heroic act will turn his fortune and his soul inside out. As secrets clash with rivalries and fateful twists lead to unexpected alliances, be prepared for a rollercoaster of intrigue and suspense. Hold tight as we journey through betrayal, redemption, and karmic reckoning, where every choice sparks dramatic consequences. Let us begin this tale of ambition, courage, and the astonishing power of fate. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Nicholas Harrington never considered himself the type of man to stand helplessly at the edge of disaster. From his early years, he had clawed his way out of obscurity to build a life of extravagant success. Yet, on a humid July evening, while standing on the picturesque docks of Lake Como, he found himself in an uncharacteristically uncertain position. The shimmering lake, usually serene under the moonlight, churned with urgent commotion. People nearby yelled, pointing desperately at a figure thrashing in the water. Adrenaline spiking, Nicholas didn't pause to remove his tailored jacket. He dived into the lake, the cool water enveloping him like a silent promise that nothing would ever be the same after this night. Spluttering to the surface, he caught a glimpse of long hair before a frantic hand grabbed him around the neck. For an instant, he wondered if they would both drown. But he steeled his nerves. He was, after all, a man who thrived on challenge. The woman's face paled beneath the moonlight, water streaming down her cheeks and distorting her frantic eyes. Nicholas struggled to pull her towards safety. The crowd on the dock gasped and pointed, but no one dared jump in. In a surge of determination, Nicholas managed to place one arm around her waist and the other paddling furiously. The distance to the dock seemed to stretch forever in that moment. Finally, a heavy-set fisherman knelt down, extending a calloused hand to hoist her up. Nicholas climbed after her, panting, heart hammering in his chest. Without a second thought, he pressed his ear against her mouth. Her breath was shallow, but growing steadier. Relieved, he laid her gently on the wooden planks, silently thanking every ounce of strength that had allowed him to save a life. Shouts for help echoed across the lakeside. In the distance, an ambulance siren wailed, a discordant melody that felt jarringly out of place on such an idyllic night. People crowded around the drenched stranger, some offering blankets, others gawking as if uncertain what to do. Nicholas stood off to the side, his shirt clinging to his torso, hair dripping, as he tried to make sense of the chaos. He wondered who she was, and how she ended up struggling in those black waters. A fleeting sense of dread crept up his spine, whispering that his spontaneous act of kindness might prove more complicated than he could ever imagine. And though he would never admit it openly, part of him thrilled at the mystery already unfurling before his eyes. Paramedics arrived with brisk efficiency, placing the woman on a stretcher and asking questions. Nicholas could only partially answer. He didn't know her name, didn't know if she had family nearby. The paramedics wrapped her in warm foil blankets. One of them gently squeezed Nicholas's shoulder and murmured, "You did a good thing tonight." He nodded, blinking away the water from his lashes. Good or not, Nicholas sensed this was more than just a charitable deed. Something about her pale, refined features struck him as oddly familiar, though he couldn't pinpoint why. The ambulance lights receded into the distance, leaving Nicholas standing in the hush of the lakeside crowd, mind roiling with questions. Unable to shake the nagging curiosity, Nicholas found himself drawn to the local hospital the next day. Past the towering marble columns of St. Mary's Hospital and through the antiseptic scent of the corridors, he roamed, uncertain if he even had the right to inquire about the woman. He was about to turn around and leave when a soft voice called out, "Mr. Harrington?" Turning, he saw a nurse. Her eyes shone with cautious gratitude as she asked if he was the man who had saved the woman from the lake. Nicholas nodded, feeling strangely self-conscious. The nurse led him to a private room, cautioning him to be prepared. His pulse quickened. He had no idea what state he would find her in, or how she might react to a total stranger's presence. Inside the dimly lit room, the woman stirred. Bandages wrapped around her arm, and a bruise was blooming on her temple. Still, her eyes opened slowly, revealing a depth of willpower that caught Nicholas off guard. She tried to speak, but no words emerged. The nurse gently patted her hand and told her that this was the man who'd saved her life. Those cool, dark eyes locked onto Nicholas, and he sensed a ripple of emotion passing through her: fear, gratitude, and something else he couldn't identify. She whispered a shaky thanks, but the conversation ended as quickly as it began. The doctor stepped in, politely but firmly asking Nicholas to wait outside while they performed a series of checks. As he walked back through the sterile corridors, an uneasy curiosity tugged at him. Who was she? And why did her presence feel like a puzzle piece suddenly falling into place? He returned the next day, but the staff informed him she'd been discharged hours earlier. They did not offer a name or forwarding address. Nicholas found himself uncharacteristically troubled. His usual routine morning runs, overseeing Harrington innovations, negotiating deals, felt overshadowed by thoughts of the unknown woman. He mentioned it to his assistant, Grace, who tried discreetly to find hospital records, but only came up with partial information. The patient had paid in cash. No insurance on record, no official identification. Grace shrugged, remarking it was an odd situation, but perhaps the woman valued her privacy. Nicholas tried to brush it off, but he couldn't quell the lingering sense of unfinished business. That same week, Nicholas was jolted out of his reverie by unsettling news from his board of directors. Rumors swirled that his longtime business rival, Victor Albright, was planning a massive corporate coup. Albright had cultivated a reputation for underhanded tactics, and there was talk he'd secured a new partner from overseas, someone with a keen interest in dismantling Harrington innovations from within. Nicholas had fought many battles in the business arena, but this felt more personal, as though Albright was orchestrating not just a market strategy, but a carefully targeted sabotage. Anxiety pricked at Nicholas's consciousness. Even so, the image of the woman's rescue persisted in his thoughts, colliding with the stress of corporate warfare. He decided to travel to Italy for a high-profile investor conference, one he suspected Albright would also attend. Lake Como wasn't far from the conference venue, and the memory of that night still tugged at him. A private jet, arranged through Harrington Innovations, soared into the clouds. Nicholas sipped a glass of aged whiskey, the smoky flavor failing to ease his tension. Grace accompanied him, briefing him on the potential alliances he might form. She also mentioned that Albright was rumored to appear with a special guest, a daughter who had recently returned from abroad. "I didn't even know Albright had a daughter," Grace added, sounding as perplexed as Nicholas felt. He leaned forward, interest piqued. Albright was notoriously secretive about his personal life. This development was strange, but Nicholas was too consumed by business strategies to dwell on it for long. The conference teemed with power-suited executives, bright banners, and eager journalists. Inside the Grand Hall, Nicholas maneuvered through throngs of venture capitalists and high-tech innovators. The air crackled with ambition. At one point, he glimpsed Albright standing near an ornate marble column, conversing with a woman whose back was turned. She wore a sophisticated navy dress, her posture rigid with an almost defiant grace. Nicholas felt a nagging sense of déjà vu, the tilt of her head, the subtle curve of her shoulders. He had seen that silhouette before. As he drew closer, laughter echoed in the halls, and the woman turned slightly, revealing a bruise-like shadow near her temple. In that instant, Nicholas froze. It was the same woman he had pulled from the lake. She was Albright's daughter. A jolt of disbelief flooded Nicholas's veins. Had he really saved Victor Albright's daughter from drowning? He hid behind a tall banner to gather his wits. Questions swirled in his mind. Why was she alone at the lake that night? Why had she paid her medical bills in cash and vanished without a trace? He peeked out again, his heart hammering. Albright turned, saying something, and the daughter, her name was apparently Selena Albright, listened intently. She appeared calm and confident, betraying no sign of the ordeal she had just survived. Nicholas watched her keenly, trying to decipher whether she recognized him from across the bustling conference hall. But she didn't glance his way. The tension coiled in him like a spring. Nicholas slipped into a nearby lounge to collect himself. The revelation that his good deed was tied to his greatest rival felt like a cosmic joke. He recalled Albright's relentless attempts to crush Harrington innovations, from undercutting deals to spreading vicious rumors. Suddenly, Nicholas's chivalrous act took on a new dimension. Had he unknowingly saved the life of the very person destined to help Albright ruin him? Nicholas's world tilted precariously. He considered confronting Selena directly, but caution held him back. He knew that Albright would spin any interaction into an advantage, and yet the memory of her wide, fearful eyes in the water tugged at a softer side of him, a side that recognized she was a separate entity from her father's cruel ambitions. That side of him wanted to see if she was all right. Later that evening, a formal gala in one of Lake Como's grand villas brought all the conference attendees together. Lanterns glowed along manicured gardens that swept down to the water, and the sweet scent of jasmine mingled with the lively chatter of financiers. Nicholas arrived in a crisp black tuxedo, hair combed back to perfection. He surveyed the crowd and spotted Albright, laughing loudly among a circle of admirers. Selena stood a short distance away, sipping a flute of champagne. Nicholas wove through the sea of elegantly dressed people, his heart pounding with each step. As he approached, she turned. Their eyes locked, and a flicker of recognition ignited in her gaze. Selena's expression was a tempest of emotions: shock, confusion, and maybe gratitude. But before a single word could pass between them, Albright glanced over and saw Nicholas. Instantly, the older man's face hardened into a mask of hostility. Harrington, Albright spat, gripping his own champagne glass with white-knuckled intensity. Nicholas forced a polite smile. Albright, he greeted in turn, voice devoid of warmth. Selena stood silent, her body language tight. Albright stepped forward protectively, as though shielding her from some hidden threat. Nicholas resisted the urge to blurt out that he had rescued her. He wasn't even sure if Albright knew. Instead, he nodded politely to Selena before taking a calculated step back, letting the father-daughter duo drift away. Throughout the evening, Nicholas caught glimpses of Selena. She seemed restless, glancing around with furrowed brows, sometimes looking in his direction with a hesitant curiosity. He longed to approach her directly, but the throngs of dignitaries, combined with Albright's hawk-like vigilance, made conversation nearly impossible. Even so, Nicholas felt a strange magnetism, as though they were both bound by a secret that threatened to unravel at any moment. People milled about, oblivious to the mounting tension, but Nicholas sensed that the night was leading to a confrontation he couldn't predict. No matter how hard he tried to remain composed, a part of him vibrated with the sense that destinies were colliding and that the outcome might reshape his future entirely. The conference concluded with a flurry of business cards exchanged and new ventures proposed. Meanwhile, Nicholas wrestled with disquiet. He was used to controlling every aspect of his life, from multi-million-dollar deals to personal relationships. Now, a single twist of fate, saving the life of his rival's daughter, had tossed him into chaotic territory. As the final day's panels wrapped up, Nicholas found himself alone on a balcony, watching the sun dip below Lake Como's horizon. The shimmering orange reflection reminded him of that harrowing night when the moonlight had illuminated Selena's desperate struggle in the water. His mind reeled with possibilities. Should he reveal the truth? Would Albright retaliate if he discovered Nicholas's involvement? Or was there an opportunity here to break the cycle of rivalry? He didn't realize Selena had joined him until her soft voice broke the quiet. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she asked, nodding toward the lake. Nicholas turned, startled to find her standing mere steps away, a gentle breeze ruffling her hair. Up close, she looked both determined and guarded, like someone bracing for an unpleasant revelation. "Yes," Nicholas managed, "it is." A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Selena sighed. "I recognized you," she admitted, her gaze drifting over the water. "But I wasn't sure how to approach you with my father watching." Nicholas inclined his head. "I assumed as much," he replied quietly, his chest constricted at the vulnerability in her voice. This was the woman he had saved, yet here she was, torn between loyalty to her father and an unspoken debt of gratitude. Selena glanced around, as if expecting Albright to materialize. Then she spoke in a hurried whisper. "I never thanked you properly for saving my life. I don't even know what happened that night. One moment I was admiring the lake from the edge of the dock. The next I was falling in." She paused, struggling with the memory. "I'm not clumsy, I swear. It felt like my heel got caught on something." Nicholas listened intently, every nerve alive. Could someone have pushed her? The unspoken question hung in the air, but he didn't voice it. Instead, he softly said, "You're welcome. I'm just glad you're all right." She nodded, sadness flickering in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered again, voice trembling with sincerity. And with that, she turned and disappeared back into the gala, leaving Nicholas alone with a rush of unanswered questions. Events took a sharp turn upon Nicholas's return home. Grace greeted him at the Harrington Innovations foyer with urgent news. Key files were missing from the company's secure server. Important patents, blueprints, and negotiation documents had vanished without a trace. Nicholas's first thought was an inside job. Then Albright's name flared in his mind. The missing data coincided too neatly with his rival's rumored overseas deals. The possibility that Selena's unexpected tumble into Lake Como was orchestrated to distract or trap him briefly crossed his mind. But that idea felt too sinister. She had nearly drowned, no matter how cunning Albright might be. Would he put his own daughter at such risk? Nicholas called an emergency board meeting. He locked down all external network access and brought in cybersecurity experts. Tension gripped the boardroom like a vise. The stark, fluorescent lights illuminated anxious faces as charts displayed the severity of the breach. Millions of dollars worth of intellectual property could be compromised. Nicholas slammed a fist on the table in frustration. Not only was his company at stake, but if Albright succeeded in harnessing that data, Harrington Innovations might never recover. Whispers among board members suggested a traitor in their midst. Nicholas surveyed them all with uncharacteristic suspicion, determined to root out the leak. Days blurred into nights as Nicholas and his team combed through digital footprints. Eventually, they traced a clue that led to a relatively new junior executive, Darren Linton. He had joined the company a mere 6 months earlier, bringing a stellar resume and impeccable references. Yet forensic analysis of the server revealed Darren's credentials had accessed the missing data files at suspicious times. Confronted with the evidence, Darren froze. Terrified, he confessed, he'd been blackmailed. Albright had threatened to expose Darren's personal indiscretions if he didn't comply. Nicholas's rage flared. While he had always considered Albright a ruthless competitor, blackmailing an employee and stealing proprietary files was a new low. Nicholas fired Darren on the spot, but the damage was already done. And somewhere in the swirling chaos, he kept picturing Selena's face, torn and apologetic, as though she might be the key to unraveling the whole twisted game. The next twist came late one night when Nicholas's phone buzzed with a blocked call. Half expecting another corporate crisis, he answered warily, only to hear Selena's trembling voice. "I'm sorry to call so late," she whispered, "but I need to speak with you. Please, can we meet somewhere private?" Nicholas's pulse quickened. This was the first direct communication from her since they'd parted at Lake Como. Despite the glaring conflicts of interest, curiosity won out. They arranged to meet at an upscale cafe hidden away in an unassuming corner of the city. Nicholas arrived early, scanning the dim interior where only a handful of patrons lingered over steaming cups of espresso. Selena appeared wearing a simple coat, hair pulled back in a low bun, looking every bit as though she wanted to remain unnoticed. She slid into the chair across from Nicholas. Before he could greet her, she blurted, "I had no idea my father was planning to infiltrate your company. I found some documents in his study. I'm not sure what's going on, but it looks serious." Her voice wavered with urgency. Nicholas studied her warily. He knew Albright was cunning enough to stage this entire encounter, using Selena as a pawn. Still, the genuine distress in her eyes made him lean forward. "What kind of documents?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. She hesitated, fishing a small thumb drive from her pocket and sliding it toward him under the table. "They mention your patents, details about your upcoming expansions in Asia. I don't know how he got them, but I suspect it's related to something bigger, something dangerous." Nicholas's mind whirled with suspicion and cautious relief. If the information was real, it could confirm everything he feared. Selena clutched her coffee mug as if it were a lifeline. "Look, I'm not proud of what my father does, but please believe me, I had no idea he was taking it this far." Nicholas exhaled, torn between appreciating her candor and wondering if this was all a carefully orchestrated ruse. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. Her voice cracked with sincerity. "Because you saved my life, and because I can't stand by while he destroys a man who showed me kindness." The weight of her words hung in the air. Nicholas believed her at least enough to suspect that she was caught in a moral tug-of-war. He pocketed the thumb drive, promising to examine its contents. She offered a small, sad smile. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, with a furtive glance around, she stood and disappeared into the night. Back in his office, Nicholas inserted the thumb drive into a secure, offline laptop. The data was shocking in its breadth. Albright had compiled a dossier on every major initiative Harrington Innovations was working on, from upcoming tech projects to acquisitions. More alarming, references to overseas criminal syndicates hinted at an elaborate plan to sabotage Nicholas's deals and sell off the stolen intellectual property at a sky-high profit. Nicholas felt a chill run down his spine. This went beyond typical corporate espionage. It reeked of a sophisticated, potentially dangerous network. Suddenly, it became clear why Selena was so alarmed. If Albright's plan succeeded, Nicholas could lose everything. Worse, the ripple effect could devastate not just him, but thousands of employees worldwide. Fueled by this urgent threat, Nicholas summoned his top legal and security teams, instructing them to gather any and all evidence linking Albright to illegal activities. He also authorized a silent partnership with law enforcement, hoping to set a trap. Nicholas was no stranger to cutthroat competition, but Albright's unscrupulous methods had escalated to criminal proportions. Each day brought new revelations of the older man's entanglements in murky alliances. Despite the building storm, Nicholas's mind kept flickering to Selena. With each new piece of incriminating data, his concern for her deepened. He worried about the consequences she might face if Albright discovered her betrayal. A momentary distraction arrived in the form of an invitation to a lavish charity event at the Guggenheim Museum in New York. Known for its spiraling architecture, the Guggenheim was a real-world symbol of innovation and art, an apt setting, Nicholas mused wryly, for a battle of wits among the city's elite. Albright was rumoured to be attending as well. Though part of Nicholas balked at playing social niceties, he saw an opportunity to gather more intelligence. On the appointed evening, he stepped out of a sleek limousine onto Fifth Avenue. Photographers flashed cameras, capturing the city's wealthiest denizens draped in designer finery. Nicholas strode purposefully into the Guggenheim, determined to confront Albright from a position of quiet power. Inside, the museum buzzed with excitement. Champagne glasses clinked under the bright lights, while modern art pieces glowed along the curved walls. Nicholas spotted Albright almost immediately, holding court among a circle of investors near a striking Kandinsky painting. But it was Selena who caught Nicholas's eye. She hovered near the painting's edge, expression guarded, their gazes locked, and Nicholas felt an instant surge of protectiveness. Albright, noticing the silent exchange, frowned deeply. Nicholas approached anyway, wearing the mask of polite civility. "Good evening, Albright," he said, ignoring the coil of tension in his stomach. Albright's voice dripped with false pleasantry. "Harrington. Enjoying the event, I hope." In that moment, the conversation turned into a dangerous dance of insinuations and half-truths. Albright boasted about new partnerships in Asia, dropping cryptic hints that he was on the verge of unveiling a groundbreaking project. Nicholas played along, feigning indifference. Selena stood silently, the unspoken knowledge in her eyes intensifying the moment. The men's exchange was interrupted by a hush spreading through the crowd. The museum director was about to make an important announcement. Under the glowing spotlight, she thanked the evening's major donors. When she mentioned Albright's substantial contribution, the room applauded. Nicholas forced a polite clap. The next name caused a bigger stir. Nicholas Harrington, doubling Albright's donation. A murmur of intrigue swept through the attendees. Nicholas caught Albright's glare, reading it as an unspoken challenge. The tension thickened, setting the stage for conflict that loomed dangerously close. As the formalities concluded, Selena quietly slipped away from her father's side. Nicholas followed, maintaining enough distance to avoid arousing suspicion. She moved to a quiet alcove near a lesser-known sculpture, checking over her shoulder. The tension in her posture was palpable. Nicholas approached cautiously. She wasted no time. "He knows something's off. I can see it in the way he looks at me," she whispered, voice tense. Nicholas frowned. "Do you think he suspects you passed those files?" he asked, dread curling in his stomach. Selena nodded grimly. "I'm not sure, but I've overheard him making cryptic phone calls. We need to be careful." Nicholas glanced around, heart pounding. Each second in that alcove felt like a risk. "We're very close to bringing him down," Nicholas assured her softly. "But please, watch your back." Over the ensuing days, Albright's malevolence intensified. Nicholas received veiled threats in the form of anonymous emails warning him to back off or face dire consequences. Investigations revealed that Albright was employing private security firms, possibly mercenaries, to fortify his shady dealings. Nicholas worried constantly about Selena's safety. One late afternoon, Selena called again, her tone urgently hushed. "I think my father knows I'm feeding you information." He hasn't confronted me directly, but I can feel him watching. Something is about to happen. Her voice shook with fear. Nicholas's protective instincts kicked into overdrive. If Albright turned violent, there was no telling how far he might go. Nicholas insisted Selena stay with a trusted friend while he accelerated the operation to expose Albright's crimes. Yet, fate had other plans. 2 nights later, Selena vanished. When Nicholas tried to call, her phone went straight to voicemail. With each passing hour, dread gripped him tighter. He reached out to Grace, who began discreet inquiries. Finally, a chilling email arrived from an unknown sender. If you want Selena back unharmed, you will destroy all the evidence against Albright. Nicholas's heart pounded so hard he could barely think. Had Albright kidnapped his own daughter? It seemed unthinkable, but desperation could drive men to monstrous deeds. Nicholas stared at the ultimatum. If he complied, Albright would walk free. If he refused, Selena's life hung in the balance. Unwilling to let fear paralyze him, Nicholas contacted the law enforcement team he'd been working with. They devised a risky plan to stage the destruction of evidence while secretly maintaining backups. Meanwhile, they tracked the location of the unknown email's origin. Nicholas's anxiety soared to unimaginable heights, envisioning Selena alone in a hidden place, perhaps terrified, all because she had tried to do the right thing. Each moment felt like an eternity. The plan was put into motion. Nicholas publicly wiped his servers of any trace of the data that could implicate Albright, making a big show of compliance. Internally, though, the real files were stashed away securely, poised for the final takedown. With the ruse underway, Nicholas received a text, "Come alone to the old warehouse on Pier 19, midnight. Bring no one." Nicholas steeled himself, adrenaline fueling every heartbeat. Armed officers waited nearby in unmarked cars, poised to intervene at a moment's notice. Nicholas arrived at the dilapidated warehouse, its broken windows staring like hollow eyes. Inside, Albright stood amid flickering fluorescent lights, flanked by 2 imposing men. Selena knelt on the concrete floor, wrists bound, her face bruised. A primal rage surged in Nicholas. He forced himself to remain calm. Albright's sneer sent cold waves of revulsion through him. "I see you got my message," Albright drawled, stepping aside to reveal Selena more fully. "Now hand over every last file." Summoning every ounce of restraint, Nicholas lifted a bag containing fake hard drives and documents. He tossed it onto the ground. "It's all there," he said, feigning defeat. Albright's henchman pounced on the bag, rummaging through the contents. Albright eyed Nicholas with a smug grin. "You should have stayed out of my affairs, Harrington. Then again, you always were too noble for your own good." A flicker of disgust crossed Nicholas's face. He glanced at Selena, noticing her tear-stained cheeks, but also a flash of fierce resolve in her eyes. Any illusions he might have had about Albright's paternal instincts were shattered. This man would stoop to any depth, even harming his own daughter, to preserve his power. As Albright confirmed the supposed surrender of evidence, Nicholas gave a subtle signal. In an instant, the warehouse doors burst open, armed officers flooding inside. Shouts reverberated off the metal walls. Albright's men drew weapons, but they were quickly outnumbered. In the chaos, Nicholas rushed to Selena, untying her restraints. She collapsed into his arms, relief flooding her expression. Albright's fury erupted as law enforcement pinned him to the ground, reading him his rights. Sirens blazed in the background as additional units arrived. Nicholas held Selena, his breath shaky. He expected her to cry or scream, but she simply clung to him, eyes brimming with gratitude and sorrow for the father she realized she never truly had. The aftermath was a whirlwind of statements, arrests, and legal procedures. Albright faced a litany of charges, from corporate espionage to kidnapping. The media devoured the scandal, splashing headlines like "Business Tycoon Albright Arrested" in shocking kidnapping plot. Nicholas was both relieved and exhausted. He watched from afar as Selena testified against her father, providing crucial evidence that sealed his fate. Yet, the emotional toll on her was immense. She had lost the only family she'd ever known, discovering that her father was far more vicious than she had dared believe. For Nicholas, a strange calm settled in. Justice had been served, but it came with a price for everyone involved. Despite the darkness surrounding Albright's downfall, a sense of karmic retribution seemed to flow through the events. The man who had built his fortune on deceit and cruelty now faced the consequences of his own evil machinations. Rumors circulated that his assets were frozen, that associates were abandoning him like rats from a sinking ship. Meanwhile, Harrington Innovations rebounded impressively. Nicholas's integrity shone through the scandal, winning renewed respect from investors and partners. He had risked everything to uphold his principles, and it paid off in both moral and material dividends. When the dust finally began to settle, Nicholas reached out to Selena, worried about how she would cope in the wake of such a life-altering revelation. She had been temporarily placed under protective custody, ensuring Albright's influence could not reach her from behind bars. One afternoon, Nicholas arranged a quiet visit. He found her seated in a modest, safe house living room, a mug of tea cradled between her hands. She offered a wan smile when she saw him. "Thank you for everything," she murmured. "If you hadn't stepped in, I don't know what would have happened." Nicholas gently shook his head. "You played a bigger role than you realize. You faced your father and told the truth." Selena's eyes shimmered with conflicting emotions: relief, guilt, grief. "I never imagined my father capable of such atrocities," she admitted, voice trembling. Nicholas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we discover too late," he said softly. He hesitated, then asked, "What will you do now?" She exhaled slowly, looking out the window. "I have no idea, but I want to move forward with my life, on my own terms. Maybe finish my studies, find a legitimate career, live honestly for once." Nicholas nodded. Beneath the sorrow, he saw the spark of resilience in her eyes. "You've got a fresh start," he said. "Not everyone gets that." In the weeks that followed, Selena remained under protective observation, gradually regaining her footing. Nicholas provided discreet assistance, ensuring she had access to counseling and resources if she needed them. He also checked in frequently, unable to forget that first night at Lake Como when he had pulled her from the brink of death. It seemed surreal how that singular act of compassion had ignited a chain reaction of cosmic justice. On a crisp morning, Nicholas accompanied her to a campus tour. She wore a calm, hopeful expression as she looked at the bustling college grounds. Under different circumstances, it would have been a typical moment of youthful ambition. Now, it felt like a solemn vow to leave behind the shadows of her past. Meanwhile, Harrington Innovations soared to new heights. Investors marveled at Nicholas's unwavering commitment to ethical business, and the media painted him as a symbol of integrity. News outlets chronicled Albright's trial, where every damning testimony solidified the older man's grim fate. Even his once loyal allies deserted him in a bid for self-preservation. Nicholas read the headlines with a mixture of relief and a lingering sense of regret for the cruelty and heartbreak that had transpired. Yet, he couldn't deny the sense of cosmic order being restored. Albright's downfall served as a cautionary tale. Eventually, deceit collapses under its own weight. As the season turned, Nicholas took a brief respite from the corporate grind to revisit Lake Como. He stood by the very dock where he'd first spotted Selena's flailing arms in the moonlit waters. The lake, peaceful and glimmering under the Italian sun, seemed unchanged. Yet everything else in his life had shifted. He inhaled the balmy air, recalling the surge of purpose. He'd felt that night he dove in to save a stranger. It reminded him that fortune could change in a heartbeat, an act of compassion could redirect a destiny. Though he had faced manipulation, betrayal, and danger, he'd also discovered that selfless acts carry their own unstoppable power. Selena joined him later that afternoon, as planned. The two strolled the cobblestone paths near the lake, exchanging stories of how they were adapting. She admitted she still had nightmares about the kidnapping, but her therapist encouraged her to find healthy outlets: travel, volunteering, and academic pursuits. Nicholas listened, heartened by her progress. She paused on the dock, her gaze drifting out over the water. "It's strange to stand here again," she mused, "but I'm glad we came back. It feels like a full circle moment, you know." Nicholas nodded. He understood the profound symbolism. The place of near tragedy had become a beacon of renewal for them both. Their conversation was interrupted by the trill of Nicholas's phone. It was Grace, informing him that the final verdict had been delivered. Albright was found guilty on multiple counts, facing what could be decades behind bars. Nicholas's eyes flicked to Selena, who heard enough from his side of the call to surmise the outcome. She lowered her head, sorrow and closure mingling in her expression. Gently, Nicholas placed a hand on her shoulder. Though her father's fate was sealed, her own path was now clear and unshackled from Albright's toxic legacy. In that poignant moment, they watched the golden sunlight dance across Lake Como's ripples, finding a measure of peace in the knowledge that a tide of justice had, at last, swept in. Thank you so much for joining us on this rollercoaster journey of heroism, betrayal, and ultimate redemption. Nicholas's selfless act of saving a mysterious drowning woman set in motion a cascade of revelations, leading us from the opulent shores of Lake Como to the bustling corridors of corporate power. In the end, compassion triumphed over greed, and deceit reaped its inevitable consequences, proving that no scheme is invincible against unyielding integrity and fortitude. If you found this story inspiring and suspenseful, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with those who love a dramatic tale, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating narratives that explore the unpredictable twists and turns of fate. Your support fuels our passion to bring you incredible stories that remind us all of the profound power of courage and empathy. Until next time, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in our next thrilling adventure.